Do you know that in 1977, a murder victim called the police from beyond the grave to name her own killer? This is not a fictional story, but a real case that went to trial, resulted in a conviction, and still haunts investigators today. I am about to tell you what will challenge everything you think you know about the boundary between life and death, justice and the supernatural. This is the story of Teresita Basa, the woman who refused to let death stop her from getting justice. But before we dive into one of the most bizarre cases in criminal history, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. February 21, 1977. Chicago's Edgewater neighborhood. It's a cold winter evening, and 48-year-old Teresita Basa is finishing another long shift as a respiratory therapist at Edgewater Hospital. Teresita wasn't just any hospital worker, she was the kind of person everyone loved. A Filipina immigrant born in 1929, she lived a quiet life in Chicago. She worked at Edgewater Hospital as a respiratory therapist and taught piano lessons from her apartment. She was in school to get a doctorate in music. Colleagues described her as gentle, kind, and completely devoted to helping others. But here's what makes this case so haunting from the very beginning. She had no enemies, so there wasn't a motive. Teresita Basa was, by every account, the perfect victim, someone who lived such a peaceful, helpful life that no one could imagine why anyone would want to hurt her. That evening, around 7:30 p.m., Teresita was at home in her 15th floor apartment at 2740 North Pine Grove Avenue. She had dinner and spoke with a friend on the phone around 7:30 p.m. The call lasted about 20 minutes before Basa ended it, explaining she was expecting a visitor. She had no idea that this visitor would end her life in the most brutal way imaginable. An hour after Teresita last spoke to her friend, the fire department was called to Teresita's apartment after neighbors complained of smelling smoke in the area. Picture this scene: Chicago firefighters racing up to the 15th floor, expecting a routine apartment fire. But when they burst through the door and extinguished the flames, they discovered something that would haunt them forever. The nude body of 48-year-old Teresita Basa with a kitchen knife protruding from her chest. But that wasn't the worst part. She died after a series of horrible acts, stabbed through her chest with a kitchen knife and set on fire under a pile of burning clothes and a mattress. She was stripped of her clothes and posed to look as if she'd been raped. The killer had been meticulous in their cruelty. Investigators believed that the fire had been set to cover up the murder. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was calculated, planned, and executed with chilling precision. But here's where the case takes its first twist. Medical officials determined she hadn't been sexually assaulted. Given the fact that Teresita had been found naked, detectives drew the conclusion that she had been the victim of sexual assault. To their surprise, the autopsy revealed otherwise. So if it wasn't sexual assault, what was the motive? Why would someone murder a beloved hospital worker, stage the scene to look like rape, then burn everything to cover their tracks? Detective Joe Stachula of Area 6 Homicide caught the case, and from day one, he knew it was going to be a nightmare. Left with no apparent motive and most physical evidence having been destroyed by the fire, detectives were at a loss. Think about it from the investigators' perspective. They had a victim everyone loved, no obvious motive, a crime scene destroyed by fire, and a killer who had clearly planned every detail. The apartment looked as though it had been ransacked during the commission of what they assumed was a sexual assault or a robbery gone wrong. With little evidence or leads to work from, Teresita's murder investigation quickly went cold. 4 months, detectives interviewed Teresita's friends, family, and co-workers. They found nothing. No enemies, no threats, no suspicious characters in her life. Teresita Basa seemed to have been killed by a ghost, and ironically, that's exactly what would solve her case. But while detectives were chasing dead ends, something extraordinary was about to happen that would change criminal investigation forever. 6 months into the investigation, Detective Joe Stachula of Area 6 Homicide found a note on his desk to contact the Evanston Police Department about the Teresita Basa case. He was told by the Evanston police to contact a Dr. Jose Chua in Skokie. Now, imagine you're Detective Statula. You've been working this impossible case for half a year. Your leads have dried up, the trail is stone cold, and then you get a call from someone claiming to have information about your victim. You're probably thinking, finally, a break in the case. But nothing could have prepared him for what Dr. Jose Chua was about to tell him. I can only imagine what Detective Statula and his partner Detective Lee Eplin were thinking when Dr. Chua told them that his wife, Remy Chua, might be possessed by the spirit of the murdered girl. Let me repeat that, because it's not something you hear every day in police work. A respected surgeon was calling to report that his wife was being possessed by the murder victim. Dr. Jose Chua was no quack or attention seeker. He was a successful surgeon, a man of science, someone who built his career on facts and evidence. His wife, Remy, was also a medical professional. She worked as a respiratory therapist at Edgewater Hospital, the same hospital where Teresita had worked. But here's where the story gets absolutely chilling. According to Dr. Chua, during these episodes, his wife would enter a trance-like state and speak in Tagalog, Basa's native language. Dr. Chua stated that his wife would go into a trance-like, almost comatose-type state and during these episodes claimed to be the spirit of Teresita Basa. Picture this scene. A medical professional, a woman of science, suddenly falling into trances and speaking in a language she rarely used, claiming to be a murdered coworker. And what she was saying was terrifying. "Doctor, I would like to ask for your help," were her first words. "The man who murdered me is still at large." Dr. Chua didn't know what to think. "I was really surprised and scared when I asked her name and she answered, 'Oh, I am Teresita Basa.'" Now, you might be thinking, this is clearly mental illness, stress, or attention-seeking behavior. Dr. Chua probably thought the same thing. But what happened next would change his mind forever. Remy went into a trance 3 times over the summer. Each time, the experience became more detailed, more specific, more impossible to dismiss. During her 3rd possession, Dr. Chua got more information out of his wife. In the voice of Teresita Basa, she named Alan Showery as her killer. Alan Showery, a name that meant nothing to Dr. Chua, but everything to the investigation that was about to unfold. But the spirit of Teresita Basa didn't just name her killer, she gave details that would prove crucial to solving the case. Information that Remy Chua, despite working at the same hospital, could never have known about the crime scene, about the investigation, about the evidence that had been destroyed in the fire. 5 months after Teresita Basa's murder, Remy and her husband reached out to the police with information that would either solve the case or make them look completely insane. Put yourself in Detective Statula's shoes for a moment. You've been working an impossible case with no leads, no suspects, and no motive. Then someone calls claiming their wife is possessed by your victim and names a specific suspect. What do? If you're a good detective, you investigate. Even if it sounds crazy. Even if you don't believe in ghosts. Because in a case with no other leads, you follow every thread, no matter how strange. So Detective Statula looked into Alan Showery. And what he found was shocking. Alan Showery worked as a security guard at Edgewater Hospital. The same hospital where both Teresita Basa and Remy Chua worked. He had access to the building, knew the staff, and would have been familiar with Teresita's schedule and routines. But the connections went deeper. The spirit speaking through Remy provided details about stolen jewelry, about specific items taken from Teresita's apartment, about evidence that had never been made public. Information that only the killer would know. When police searched Showery's residence, they found items that belonged to Teresita Basa. Jewelry that had been stolen from her apartment the night she was murdered. Faced with the evidence, Alan Showery did something that would validate everything the Chuas had told police. He confessed. Alan Showery was convicted of murdering Teresita Basa in her high-rise apartment in Chicago, Illinois. He admitted to going to her apartment under the pretense of visiting, then robbing and murdering her before setting the fire to cover his tracks. But here's what makes this case so extraordinary. How did Remy Chua know Alan Showery was the killer? How did she know about the stolen jewelry? How did she know details about the crime that had never been made public? The prosecution didn't need to answer those questions. They had physical evidence, a confession, and a clear case. But the questions lingered, and they linger still today. Here's where the story takes a frustrating turn that will make your blood boil. Remember, this was a brutal, premeditated murder. Teresita Basa was stabbed, set on fire, and left to burn in her own apartment. The killer stole her jewelry and tried to cover up his crimes with arson. What do you think Alan Showery got for this heinous crime? Despite his confession, Showery pleaded not guilty to Teresita's murder. When a mistrial occurred, he decided to plead guilty on February 23, 1979, receiving only a 14-year sentence for his cold-blooded crime. He was released on parole in 1983. Let me repeat that. He served less than 5 years in prison. Ultimately, Showery was convicted of the murder but served less than 5 years in prison before being released in 1983. 5 years. For stabbing a woman to death and setting her on fire. If Teresita Basa's spirit was seeking justice, she got a pretty raw deal from the American legal system. This case was featured on Unsolved Mysteries, written about in books, and debated by skeptics and believers for decades. But the central question remains, how did Remy Chua know Alan Showery was the killer? Let's consider the possibilities. The supernatural explanation. Teresita Basa's spirit actually possessed Remy Chua and provided information from beyond the grave. This aligns with Filipino beliefs on spirit possession, and both families were Filipino, making this culturally significant. The logical explanation. Remy Chua somehow knew or suspected Alan Showery was involved, possibly through hospital gossip, observation, or intuition, and created the possession story as a way to provide information to police without implicating herself as an informant. The coincidence theory. This was an extraordinary coincidence combined with good detective work that followed up on a bizarre tip. But here's what we know for certain. There's no way to know how Remy Chua was able to identify Showery as the suspect. The information she provided was accurate, specific, and led to a conviction. Whether you believe in the supernatural or not, the results speak for themselves. Here's something most coverage of this case misses: the cultural significance of what happened. Filipino beliefs on spirit possession are deeply rooted in the culture. For Filipino immigrants like the Bases and Chuas, the idea of spirits communicating with the living isn't supernatural, it's part of their worldview. When Remy Chua went into those trances and spoke in Tagalog, she wasn't just claiming to be possessed, she was participating in a cultural tradition that her community would have understood and accepted. This wasn't about getting attention or creating a hoax. This was about honoring the dead and seeking justice in a way that made sense within her cultural framework. This adds another layer to the mystery. Was Remy Chua genuinely experiencing something supernatural, or was she using her cultural background to provide information to police in a way that would be taken seriously by her community and, surprisingly, by law enforcement? The story of Teresita Basa's murder spread throughout the United States, being featured on television shows and in books, including one titled Voice from the Grave, which was written by the Chuas. The Chua family wrote a book about their experience, sharing their story with the world and forever linking their names to one of the most unusual criminal cases in American history. They never profited from tragedy. They shared their experience to help others understand what they believed was a genuine supernatural encounter. But the case raises uncomfortable questions about our justice system too. If a ghost had to solve this murder because conventional investigation failed, what does that say about how we investigate crimes against immigrants, against people from different cultures, against those who might not have advocates in high places? From a purely scientific standpoint, what happened to Remy Chua can be explained several ways. Dissociative identity disorder. Severe psychological stress could have triggered a dissociative state where Remy genuinely believed she was channeling Teresita's spirit. Cryptomnesia. She may have unconsciously absorbed information about Alan Showery through casual hospital interactions and later accessed this information during a trance state. Collective unconscious. Some psychologists suggest that shared cultural experiences can create access to information through non-rational means. Deliberate deception. She may have suspected Showery and used the possession story as a way to provide information anonymously. But here's the problem with all these explanations. They don't account for the specific, accurate details she provided about the crime scene and stolen items. Information that wasn't public, wasn't available through hospital gossip, and wasn't something she could have guessed. What makes this case fascinating to paranormal investigators is the convergence of so many factors. Cultural authenticity. The possession behavior was consistent with Filipino spiritual traditions. Accurate information. Details provided could only have been known by the killer. Physical evidence. The information led to discovery of stolen items. Multiple witnesses. Dr. Chua witnessed the trances multiple times. Legal validation. The case resulted in a confession and conviction. This isn't a story about floating furniture or mysterious voices. This is about specific, actionable information that solved a real murder case. Whether you believe the source was supernatural or not, the results were undeniably real. In 2025, with our understanding of criminal psychology, victimology, and investigation techniques, the Teresita Basa case offers lessons that go beyond the supernatural elements. Victim profiling. Teresita was targeted because she was a single woman living alone, with regular routines that her killer could observe through his work at the hospital. This is a classic predatory pattern. Workplace violence. Alan Showery used his position as hospital security to access information about potential victims. This is something we now recognize as a serious security concern. Cultural barriers. The initial investigation may have missed crucial connections because of cultural differences between the largely white Chicago police force and the Filipino hospital community. Alternative information sources. Sometimes the key to solving a case comes from unexpected sources. In this case, someone willing to report supernatural experiences to authorities. Let's talk about the real injustice in this case. Alan Showery's sentence. He received only a 14-year sentence and was released on parole in 1983, serving less than 5 years in prison. This man stabbed a defenseless woman to death, set her on fire, and stole her possessions. In today's legal system, he would likely face life imprisonment. The fact that he walked free after less than 5 years is the real horror story here. Teresita Basa, whether through supernatural means or through inspiring others to seek justice on her behalf, ensured her killer was caught. But the system failed to ensure he was appropriately punished. This case changed how some police departments handle unusual tips and information sources. While most officers remain skeptical of supernatural claims, the Teresita Basa case proved that dismissing unconventional information sources entirely can mean missing crucial leads. The case also highlighted the importance of cultural competency in criminal investigation. Understanding the communities you serve, their beliefs, and their ways of processing trauma can be crucial to solving crimes. And for the Filipino-American community, this case became a symbol of how their cultural traditions could coexist with American legal systems, how their spiritual beliefs could actually serve justice in ways that conventional investigation could not. Even the most hardened skeptics have trouble explaining away all the details of this case. Let's say you don't believe in ghosts, spirits, or possession. You still have to explain. How did Remy Chua know Alan Showery was the killer? How did she know about specific stolen items that weren't public knowledge? Why did her information prove accurate in every detail? Why would she risk her reputation and career on such an outlandish story? How did she access information that even the detectives didn't have? The skeptical explanations require almost as much faith as the supernatural ones. Sometimes the most logical explanation is that we don't understand everything about consciousness, information transfer, and the connections between people who share traumatic experiences. For those who do believe in supernatural phenomena, The Teresita Basa case represents powerful validation. Here was a spirit who refused to rest until justice was served, who found a way to communicate across the barrier of death, and who ultimately ensured her killer was caught. The case suggests that consciousness might survive death, that strong emotional connections can transcend physical limitations, and that justice might be a force that operates beyond our understanding of natural law. Whether you believe this interpretation or not, you have to admit, it's a beautiful idea that the murdered can still fight for justice, that death doesn't end our ability to protect others, and that love and determination can overcome even the ultimate barrier. What's remarkable about Detective Stachla and his team is that they followed up on this bizarre tip at all. In 1977, police departments weren't exactly known for their open-mindedness about supernatural claims. But these detectives did their job. They investigated every lead, no matter how strange. This is actually a lesson for modern investigators. Keep an open mind about information sources, follow up on unusual tips, and remember that the truth can come from unexpected places. The Chuas provided information that solved a murder. The source of that information is less important than its accuracy. The case also shows the importance of thorough evidence collection and preservation. Even though the fire destroyed much of the crime scene, investigators had enough physical evidence to corroborate the information provided by Remy Chua and secure a confession. When this case became public, it captured the imagination of the entire country. Here was a real-life ghost story with legal consequences, a murder mystery with a supernatural twist, and a validation of beliefs that many people held but rarely discussed in public. The case was featured on Unsolved Mysteries, written about in numerous books and articles, and became a cultural touchstone for discussions about life after death, justice, and the limits of scientific understanding. But the media attention also brought scrutiny. Skeptics demanded explanations, believers claimed validation, and the Chua family found themselves at the center of a national debate about the supernatural. Through it all, they maintained their story. Remy had been possessed by Teresita Basa's spirit. The spirit had named Alan Showery as the killer, and this information had led to justice. They never wavered, never changed their account, and never seemed to doubt what they had experienced. Decades later, the Teresita Basa case continues to influence how we think about unsolved crimes, alternative investigation methods, and the intersection of cultural beliefs with legal systems. Some police departments now have protocols for handling tips that come from unconventional sources, including psychics, mediums, and people claiming supernatural experiences. While these tips are approached with skepticism, they're not automatically dismissed. The case also influenced the study of consciousness, near-death experiences, and communication between the living and the dead. Researchers continue to investigate cases where information seems to transfer through non-conventional means. And for true crime enthusiasts, the case represents something unique, a murder mystery where the victim herself provided the key to solving her own case. It's a story that satisfies our desire for justice while challenging our assumptions about the nature of reality. Nearly 5 decades later, questions about the Teresita Basa case remain. Did Teresita Basa's spirit actually possess Remy Chua? How did Remy access accurate information about the crime? Why did Alan Showery receive such a light sentence? What happened to him after his release in 1983? Are there other cases where supernatural information led to solving crimes? What can this case teach us about consciousness, death, and justice? These questions may never be fully answered, but they keep the case alive in our collective consciousness and continue to challenge our understanding of what's possible. We often forget that behind every true crime story are real people who paid real costs. Teresita Basa paid with her life. Her family paid with their grief and loss. The Chua family paid with their privacy and peace of mind. Remy Chua didn't ask to be possessed by a murder victim's spirit. She didn't seek fame or attention. She was a medical professional who found herself in an impossible situation and chose to do what she believed was right, even knowing it would change her life forever. Dr. Jose Chua risked his medical reputation by supporting his wife's claims and contacting police. He could have dismissed her experiences as stress or mental illness, but he chose to believe her and act on that belief. These were ordinary people who found themselves in extraordinary circumstances and chose to seek justice, regardless of the personal cost. The Teresita Basa case forces us to confront fundamental questions about the nature of existence. Does consciousness survive death? Can the dead communicate with the living? Is justice a force that transcends physical death? Are there ways of knowing that go beyond our five senses? How should rational institutions handle claims that seem supernatural? These aren't just abstract philosophical questions. They have real-world implications for how we investigate crimes, how we treat witnesses, and how we define evidence and truth. The case suggests that our understanding of consciousness, communication, and information transfer may be far more limited than we think. It challenges the materialist worldview that dominates modern science and opens the door to possibilities that many people believe but few are willing to discuss in public. One of the most remarkable aspects of this case is how the justice system handled supernatural testimony. The information provided by Remy Chua was treated as legitimate evidence, investigated thoroughly, and ultimately used to secure a conviction. This sets a precedent that's both fascinating and troubling. If we accept supernatural information as valid evidence in one case, how do we handle similar claims in the future? What standards do we apply? How do we separate genuine supernatural experiences from fraud, mental illness, or attention-seeking behavior? The legal system's acceptance of the Chua's claims suggests a pragmatic approach. If the information is accurate and leads to solving crimes, the source matters less than the results. This is both refreshing and concerning, depending on your perspective. Perhaps most importantly, the Teresita Basa case represents a successful bridge between different cultural worldviews. Filipino spiritual traditions were respected and validated by American legal institutions. Cultural beliefs that might have been dismissed as superstition were treated as potentially valuable information sources. This cultural bridge building is crucial for effective law enforcement in diverse communities. When people feel that their beliefs and perspectives are respected, they're more likely to cooperate with investigations and provide information that could solve crimes. The case shows that cultural competency isn't just about being politically correct. It can be the difference between solving a murder and letting a killer go free. So what's the truth about Teresita Basa and the voice from beyond the grave? After researching every available source, examining every angle, and considering every explanation, I can tell you this: we may never know for certain. What we do know is that a woman was brutally murdered, a case went cold, unconventional information was provided to police, that information proved accurate, and a killer was caught and convicted. Whether the information came from supernatural sources, unconscious knowledge, cultural intuition, or deliberate investigation matters less than the fact that justice was served. But perhaps that's the point. Perhaps the real lesson of the Teresita Basa case isn't about proving or disproving the supernatural. It's about staying open to possibilities, following every lead, and never giving up on justice for victims who can no longer speak for themselves. Except, in this case, maybe she could speak for herself after all. Here's my challenge to you: research this case yourself. Look into Alan Showery's background, investigate the hospital connections, examine the cultural context, and form your own opinion about what really happened. But more importantly, let this case remind you that behind every true crime story is a real person who deserved justice, whose life mattered, and whose story deserves to be told with respect and accuracy. Teresita Basa was more than just a murder victim. She was a healer, a music student, a piano teacher, an immigrant who built a life in America and served her community until someone took it all away. Whether her spirit spoke from beyond the grave or inspired others to seek justice on her behalf, her story is one of determination, love, and the refusal to let evil triumph. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most supernatural thing of all. As I finish telling you this story, I want you to imagine Teresita Basa's voice. Not the supernatural voice that allegedly spoke through Remy Chua, but her real voice, the voice of a woman who dedicated her life to helping others breathe easier, who taught children to play piano, who was building a future that was stolen from her. That voice was silenced on February 21, 1977, but in a way, it was never truly quiet. Whether through supernatural possession, cultural tradition, human intuition, or just the refusal of good people to let evil go unpunished, Teresita's voice found a way to name her killer and ensure justice was served. Her case reminds us that truth has a way of surfacing, that justice finds a path even when conventional methods fail, and that sometimes the most impossible explanations are the ones that lead us to the truth. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, whether you think Remy Chua was genuinely possessed or brilliantly intuitive, one thing is certain: Teresita Basa's voice refuses to be silenced. Her story continues to challenge our assumptions, inspire our investigations, and remind us that every victim deserves justice, no matter how impossible it seems to achieve. And in a world where too many crimes go unsolved, where too many voices are silenced forever, maybe that's the miracle we need to believe in. Not ghosts or spirits, but the power of human determination to ensure that no victim is ever truly forgotten. The ghost who solved her own murder teaches us that death doesn't end our responsibility to the living, that justice is worth fighting for even from beyond the grave, and that sometimes the most extraordinary explanations are the only ones that make sense. Rest in peace, Teresita Basa. Your voice was heard. Your killer was caught. Your story lives on. And somewhere, in the space between the natural and supernatural, between the explainable and the mysterious, between life and death, justice was served.